Welcome to Cosmic Comics, Games and Collectibles, your zen of geekism. We carry comics old and new, magazines, toys, games like Pokemon, Magic, D&D. Want Godzilla, Ultraman, Star Trek, Ninja Turtles, Funko Pops? You'll find it all here. Shop our Cosmic Sound Room and pick up a record or two. Enjoy our Comic Coffee Lounge with a cup of Sasquatch coffee while geeking out over a super cool movie on our big screen. Cosmic Comic, Games and Collectibles. Superman loves us, and so will you.
Hi everyone, Jason Hunt here, inviting you to join us every Saturday morning for news, the week's headlines in science fiction, fantasy, horror, comic books, video games, plus Comic-Con updates and the weather, and the occasional interview along the way. We call it Good Morning Multiverse. We hope you join us every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, 10 Central, right here on Sci-Fi for Me TV.
America's southern border has become a war zone. Human traffickers, drug smugglers, and terrorists flow across the Rio Grande with impunity, secure in the knowledge that no one will stop them. A distant federal government lectures Americans on their privilege while punishing overworked Border Patrol agents who were helpless to stem the tidal wave of invaders and determined migrants. Second-generation Cuban-American Marcos Zamora is a military vet, more patriotic than most Americans. No longer able to ignore the chaos at his doorstep, he acts. Joined by his best friend Gus, they hit the border every night, saving lives while stopping violent drug cartels and other opportunists. The government reacts with fury at Marco's attempts to preserve American sovereignty, deploying the full might of their enforcement agencies. But Marcos understands that the only thing the rich and powerful fear is bad publicity, and he records every encounter. Whoever he is, this private American must be stopped. Illustrated by Richard Bonk and written by Eisner winner Mike Barron, Private American is his version of Captain America, and maybe a little Punisher, taking part in this ongoing, violent, and very real battle of good versus evil in the war for American sovereignty. Grab your copy at theprivateamerican.com.
We have a secure border, and that is a priority for our administration.
Come get some.
And good evening again, everybody. I am RJ Carter, Senior Managing Editor here at CriticalBlast.com, Chief Envelope Licker for Critical Blast Logistics, Myopic Proofreader for Critical Blast Publishing, and yes, I still answer the phones to help you with your data needs, putting my 35 years of data design experience to your benefit for all your crowdfunders that just kind of go off the rails, because they tend to do that when you set them up. So when you come here, we like to talk about comic books. And you also know that we generally have our fair share of authors on here who write, real books. I don't know how to differentiate them, but they are real books. Comics are more movies and television and game than they are book. But tonight we're going to kind of try to appease both crowds. We are going to bring on an author who is writing about some pivotal figures in the comic book industry. And that would be Mr. Bob Batchelor, who's quite the knowledgeable person on one person called Stan Lee. So please welcome with me to the show, Mr. Bob Batchelor. We have a wonderful studio audience here tonight.
That's wonderful. Great to be welcomed in that way.
So this is not the right panel. This is the panel.
We are in the comics.
We are in, I see in the funny papers, as they say. We are simulcasting tonight with the Comic Talk with Pops Van Zant channel over on the Madness Comics Network. So we are broadening our audience to get you to speak to as many people as possible about this book. Now, here's the thing where I want you to set me straight on this, because we talked 2 years ago about a Mike. I've got somebody else on my mind. Mike Barron's on my mind because of that last trailer. About Stan Lee and his biography that you did. And this is a new biography on Stan Lee. What's the difference between the two? I mean, did you unearth new information? Is it formatted differently? What's the story?
Formatted, yeah, that's great. So I'm going to tell you something. And here's the thing that happened in the pre-times and the post-times. Everything that you think happened 2 years ago was actually 5 years ago. Because when we spoke about the first book 5 years ago, 2017, if you can believe that.
That's amazing.
I know. And let me tell you, here is what I have always been very thankful for. You were one of the first people to take that Stan Lee biography seriously. And to this day, I remember that. And it's why I reached out to you now. When that first Stan Lee biography came out, I had been writing kind of quasi-scholarly books. Like, people dug my books, but they were overpriced. They were mainly for library and scholarly prof audiences. And so that Stan Lee book was my first really foray into trade book writing. And a lot of people, they didn't take me seriously because I hadn't been writing about comic books forever. So you were one of the first. And yeah, and you were instrumental to building my confidence about what I was doing, and that what I was doing, I was on the right track.
You know what? I'm glad of that. I'm very happy for that. I just looked up the interview because I was not even live streaming then. We were doing phone calls and recording. Maybe we did a Skype and I retyped it. But it is
That's exactly what we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you won't find it on the YouTube channel, folks. You have to go to the link that I threw into the chat there. But you can find it 2017. I can't believe how the time has flown. That was I don't know. I moved here 2 years ago, so everything before I moved here happened all at once.
Yeah. So the difference. Yeah. So the difference with the book is clearly Stan Lee was still alive when I wrote that first book. And sadly, a lot of really bad things happened to him at the end of his life. So given that this December 28th would be Stan Lee's centennial, the 100th anniversary of his birth, I wanted to add all the new material that I had come across and researched. I wanted to reframe some of the book based on things that I had learned about Stan Lee since then, because I never stopped researching Stan Lee. Even once the book came out, I kept going. I don't know if it's a good trait or a bad trait that I have, but I can't let the topics go. I keep investigating. So I had a lot of new things I wanted to say about Stan Lee. And so I wanted to broaden it as well, because I thought the first book I went after Marvel fans. But with this book, I wanted to broaden it to go after more readers that love history, that love biography, the kind of people that read the Atlantic Monthly, like that love biography. And then the second thing, which I think viewers and listeners will be interested in, is we've also published a young adult version of Stan Lee, the man behind Marvel. And that comes directly from parents, teachers, and teenagers themselves who, since the first book, have been asking me, please write a young adult nonfiction version because we want something for us. So what we did is we hired a comic book illustrator to highlight certain aspects of Stan's life. We beefed up the pictures. It's certainly not a graphic novel. We didn't go that far, but the biography for the young adults is designed. I rewrote it completely. I stripped the original book down and built it back up from the studs, specifically for that audience. So it seems like it's not been that long since that first book came out, but the first book did great. I mean, it was a bestseller in a lot of places, in China and Italy. I mean, they couldn't keep it on the shelves. So strange places. But I still, to this day, have people who say to me, you wrote a book on Stan Lee? And I'm like, yeah. And so the answer to one biography is another biography, because there's always so much more to learn. And that was really the rationale for both books.
So when you say that you wrote this for young adults, are you saying you aimed it towards middle school readers or upper teenagers? Because I'm curious what the approach was to changing the language to make it more accessible to the audience you were targeting. Yeah,
I think, and the other crazy thing, since 2017, I'm looking at my bookshelves right now. I've written, in those 5 years, I've written, in counting these two, I've written 5 books in those 5 years, and they're all trade books. And so I think what readers like about my work is I write it. I'm a professional historian. I was trained in graduate school as a historian. I never want readers to know that. What I want them to feel is that it's like the longest screenplay they've ever read, or that it's cinematic in the way that the information unfolds. So with the young adult version, I aimed it at, it's aimed at high school students. What I thought my ideal reader in my mind was the parents that were talking to me who had kids in high school, particularly boys in high school, that weren't really connecting with the kind of novels and nonfiction that they were forced to read in their classes, but they still wanted to learn American history. So I thought to myself, using Stan's life, you have from 1920s through the 2020s. You have 100 years of this amazing world that we've lived in that's replicated kind of in this man's life. So really it was high school high school male reader. That's I have my best friend from high school teaches at the high school we went. He teaches AP history. It was kind of in my mind, some other parents that had reached out to me. So I just tried to make it more cinematic. I cut back on some of the insider things about how it is to run a magazine that I thought high school students might not be as interested as adult readers are. And that's how I approached it.
But, in 100 years of time, you're seeing all that American history. You just do it through the eyes of your central figure. And, you've got 2 world wars that took place during Stan's lifetime, plus, some Korea and some Vietnam and all that. He did serve in the military, if I remember correctly. I just
Yeah.
don't know when and where.
Oh no, Stan's military career is very interesting. He graduated from high school early because his mother wanted him to be able to contribute to the family financially. And so he graduated early, and clearly they weren't going to go to college. One of the things that Stan Lee fans probably don't know is he was dirt poor. He grew up in the streets of New York City, Jewish family, incredibly poor, like family handouts keeping him and his parents afloat, poor, like that level. When he graduated from high school, he kind of lucks into the job at Timely Comics, which would become Marvel. By the time World War II breaks out, a lot of comic book creators were waiting. They're waiting to get drafted. And Stan didn't feel that was what was right for him. So he joined the army, and he was so intelligent that he placed into the Signal Corps. And the Signal Corps was like where the smartest people in the military went. You actually took a
IT
test.
division today.
Yeah. Incredibly smart guy. And what Stan thought he would end up doing was stringing communication lines in Europe on the battlefields, because in that era, you had to string the lines like when we were younger, when you would drive down old country roads and see the telephone pole after telephone pole. But when his superiors found out that he had this background in comic books, the interesting thing is, and this is where I bring all these different pieces together as a cultural historian, most people were coming off the farms going into World War II. They weren't educated. The average education level is maybe 8th grade at best. They couldn't read instruction manuals. And so somebody like Stan could create comic book-like instruction manuals to teach people these intricate, detailed level pieces of work that they had to do, or about equipment or things. And it was highly valuable. So the Army excelled at making training videos, at making videos about what was happening on the front. They used this as education. So Stan was one of less than a dozen people who was designated an Army playwright. And there were some famous people included there, like Frank Capra from It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
A guy that we might know named Dr. Seuss was one of the Army playwrights. William Sororin, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning and denying, he turned it down, playwright, and Stan Lee. And so Stan had quite a career in the military, staying on the home front and teaching other people in the military and on the home front everything from how to operate a machine gun to how to do payroll processing correctly so that people could get paid. It was an intensely interesting era for him.
That's yeah, he did work with a lot of interesting people. I remember seeing some of the Ted Giesel, the Dr. Seuss animations that Chuck Jones would do. Private Snafu, that's who I was thinking of.
Yep.
I think that was his that he worked with on them, but he did a lot of the loose lips sink ships kind of warning cartoons about don't go calling your girlfriend and tell her where you're stationed when you go overseas, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Stan's big claim to fame was he actually it's amazing when you think about this, all that's encompassed in this one man's life. His famous thing in World War II, he was on the anti-VD, venereal disease campaign, because it's almost unfathomable to us today. But VD was actually wiping out entire divisions during World War II. I mean, there are stories of entire British divisions being basically laid up because they were getting VD from different sources on the front lines. And so Stan created this character, and the catchphrase was something like VD, not me. And it was to alert people. They actually set up these little tents in Europe where if a soldier thought they might have caught VD on a weekend retreat, they would go to these little tents and get the medication they needed and the treatment they needed. And this was really an important aspect, though we look on it now and think it's really funny. It is funny, but it was deadly serious back then. Sure. Deadly. I looked at World War II posters around venereal disease, and they had the most ludicrous, turning like Hitler and Stalin and others into these hideous monsters. And it was all around VD and Mussolini. I mean, it's very interesting history. Somebody could write a book I'm sure somebody has written a book on, kind of how they turn the Axis leaders into monstrous figures, and VD was part of that campaign.
Robert Roberts is saying getting VD while actually on the front line would be hard to explain away in 1943, but not really. I mean, there were a lot of you marched through a lot of French towns and made camp there, and the men in uniform and single ladies with their husbands gone to war or boyfriends gone to war. Let's just make it as innocent as possible.
Yeah. Human beings are human beings. I mean, you get a lot of teenage people, young 20 somethings all together. And in that kind of pressure cooker of agony that you're seeing, I mean, yeah, sure. Things are going to happen. And that's
decisions get made.
Yeah.
Mike Walters in the chat, jumping ahead of us a little bit here, but going into the voice work that Stan Lee did and his wife Joan on the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and of course, Stan was like in every single Marvel movie that was ever made up to the point of his death, and probably beyond that. I believe they're digitizing him in now, and I'm glad to see those kinds of cameos still existing. Those little tips of the hat. I take solace sometimes in the fact that Stan Lee did not invent Spider-Man until he was 45 years old. He was, getting ready to start the second half of his life before he really struck gold.
Was it quite 45? I'm not a mathematician. I'm trying to think. It was probably close. 19. Yeah. He was around 40. Yep. Okay. And it's interesting that he had already had what we in modern America would consider a long career. I mean, he had been working in comics since 1938, 1939. So by the early 60s, he already had an entire career, and he becomes an overnight success at 40 plus. And so all these things that we attribute to Stan are really like, he's inventing these things along the way, like the animation pieces that your listener just wrote in about. Nobody had done this before. Like there weren't DC editors doing this kind of thing, and so Stan Lee is kind of inventing this as he goes along. It's why I called the first book "The Man Behind Marvel," because Stan really was the facilitator of turning himself into the face of comic books. And that was important. It's much more important, if in fanboy circles, and I don't know how much your viewers deal in those, there's such battles between what Stan did and what Jack Kirby did. And but I always say, what Ditko did. And they were all super important, but Stan was the boss. I mean, Stan was running the comic book division. Every piece of that division was on his shoulders. And so it was completely different. Whether Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko were being paid properly was only part of Stan's domain as the oversight, the editorial oversight of Marvel. Martin Goodman, the owner of what was Marvel Comics, he's the one that did all those. Yeah, Stan's kind of distant relative. They were closer at times. They didn't like each other at times, but he really ran the business end of things. He's the person that we should probably direct a little more anger at. Now, the problem is, what I was trying to tell somebody earlier today, we were having a conversation about Marvel, is imagine that there was a time before Spider-Man. Like, it almost seems impossible. That never existed. But
Yeah.
Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, they invent Spider-Man, pull him out of almost nothing. And, maybe Jack Kirby had some impulse there because there were older characters that were Spider-like, all those kind of things. But that kind of line in the sand, they had no idea at the time. They moved on from Amazing Fantasy 15. They never, unless people would have responded to them, they would have just turned their backs on that. What sells magazines is when somebody puts their dimes and nickels on the newsstand and takes the comic book away. And that has been underserviced in respect to the mountain of arguments about who deserve what credit.
Yeah, because they didn't want to do Spider-Man. I mean, and when I say they, I mean Goodman. He'd been rejecting the idea, and Amazing Fantasy 15 was like, it's the last issue, put something in it. We're canceling it for poor sales. And it was like a mercy, a pity assignment. It's like, here, put your Spider-Man in here, and took off.
Yeah. I mean, people, in the environment we're in today, I mean, we want to be cognizant of diversity issues. We want to be cognizant about gender issues and who's making decisions about what. But in that era, with these kind of hardcore businessmen, if a comic book didn't sell, it got canceled. And there are hundreds and hundreds of Marvel comic books over the years that got canceled because they didn't sell. Stan has said on record many times saying that he wished that he could have introduced more superheroes who were female, but they didn't sell at the time. And so, as forward looking as Stan and some others wanted to be, it's a business. And so many people forget it's a business. If you're making jeans and your jeans don't sell, you got to find something that will sell or you're going to be out of business. And that's very much the case with comic books. When you imagine during most of Stan Lee's early run, they're selling for 10 cents, 12 cents, God forbid, 25 cents when they went back, just a bit past that. So it really is a business, and the business aspect is important.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, hard to believe there was a time before Spider-Man, but yes, obviously Marvel Comics #1 did go on sale in 1939 when it was timely. I don't know if Stan was working there at the very beginning or I believe he came in a little bit later.
Just a couple months later.
Yeah. I don't know if he was. So he was working there then when they started doing the initial Captain America, the Joe's Captain America.
Yeah, he was there. I don't know the exact date if he was there on Captain America #1, but by Captain America #3 he was. So yeah, Stan was there, and he was in a much diminished role. But by Captain America number 10, 11, he's the editor of Marvel. Timely, what was then to become Marvel. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for him, and he's a teenager and has not gone to college, and so it's the kind of career that we'll never see again. And so it's one of the reasons why there have been several biographies written. A couple came after mine. One I particularly didn't care for at all. One I thought was pretty good. And one of my mentors is a guy named Carl Rollison. He's one of the most important biographers in America, and he says the answer to one biography is another biography, because there's always new things to uncover. There's always new perspectives. And I hope that people keep writing about Stan. Like, I don't want my book to be the last book. It won't be the last book. There'll be more, and I can't wait to read them, because we're still uncovering things about Stan. My hope is that we find like a hidden garage or something, storage unit or something that gets exposed, and all the stuff that Stan had been putting aside for decades comes to light. That would actually be my dream. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when we talked in 2017, I believe you had not had a chance to ever meet Stan before that point.
No, I had met him. Yeah,
You had met him. Okay.
Mhm.
Had you met him after the biography, and did he have anything to say about it? Had he read it?
So when I met Stan, it was before the book came out, and he knew, because I had talked to some people who were kind of in his inner circle. He knew I was writing the biography, but we almost didn't talk directly about the fact. I mean, we didn't talk, like, he didn't say, well, in the biography, blah blah blah. We talked kind of as researcher to subject. When I met him and we spoke, I had just come back from the Stan Lee archives, which are strangely at the University of Wyoming. I had just spent 10 days there. I had spent 10 days, 10 to 12 hours a day, digging around in Stan Lee's like office boxes and everything that he had donated to the archive. And then literally 3 days later, I meet Stan Lee and I'm talking to him. And so he knew. And then after the book was published, I kind of caught through the grapevine that some people had told him about it and that he was positive. I doubt that he ever read it, because by the time he had talked in his early 90s, his hearing and his sight was what both went south on him pretty quickly. And so I don't know that he had the capacity to read, a regular print size at that time. So, and I've heard from friends since, kind of people that know both of us, that he was okay with it. And that's good enough for me. When I met Stan Lee, I asked him a series of questions. And at the end of the interview, he took me by the forearm, right? Like this, very imposing grip for somebody in his early 90s, a very strong grip. And he turns to me, he goes, "Thank you for asking me all these interesting and intelligent questions. Most people just want to know who my favorite superhero is." And to me, that was kind of the apex. And I've had this strange Forrest Gumpian kind of life in which I've met a lot of people. Like, I'm a poor kid from Western Pennsylvania, but I've met like, I think 8 billionaires in my life. It's just circumstance. And most people do not intimidate me at all. But when I met Stan Lee, this was it. I was shaking, because this is a person who I taught myself to read so that I could read the comic books that said Stan Lee Presents. I mean, it was a very important moment in my life. And I really had to kind of suck it up to keep my composure, because there he was. I mean, he was right there. He was this close.
Yeah, he had that effect on people. I was at Chicago Comic-Con, 88, 89, one of those, time when it was still at the Ramada O'Hare Hilton. I couldn't get in to see Stan because they were just introducing the concept of the buy another ticket on top of the ticket. And I was like, broke. But this young boy, God bless his soul. If you looked up comic book nerd in the dictionary, there would be his picture, glasses, tape, everything. And he was just in this trance. He had this book in his hands. He was carrying it like it was the Ark of the Covenant. And he walks past me, whom he does not know. And he just stops. He says, "I just met Stan Lee. He signed my book. He's so cool." And before I can say, "Wow, that's really cool. That looks like he's already to the next person. "I just met Stan Lee. He signed my book. Yeah. He's so cool." And I think he probably told every person in the con that he got to meet Stan. I've been able to see him from a distance at conventions. The year before he died, I saw him at a Wizard World. And I did speak with him on the phone. Had a phone interview with him it was the first Hulk movie was out, and I was interviewing him for another website. We were talking about that, and Stripperella was on TV, and I had just read the news that it had been canceled. And I was like,
Yeah.
condolences on, the cancellation of Stripperella. It was a valiant effort. He's like, canceled? What do you mean canceled? It's one of the highest received. Like, oh, well, maybe my news is wrong. It wasn't. but
Yeah.
I broke the news to Stan that Stripperella had been canceled.
Wow.
And
I'm wearing my Stan garb today.
Nice.
So
yeah, he
still rings in my ear. He's still. It's an amazing life, and as a biographer and a historian, you have to, kind of hats off to somebody who was completely self-invented. I mean, he's like, if you couldn't make this up. I mean, it is the American dream writ large, where a person based on their own grit and determination and intelligence rises from nothing. Like, yeah, I mean, the depths of depression that he grew up in, a Romanian Jew, first generation immigrant to the United States, and where he ended up. It's a wonderful story. It's one that I truly love. I feel like my own life has been enriched by doing these books and studying Stan.
One of the greatest contributions I think that Stan made to the comic book industry is he invented a new method of storytelling. And they call it the Marvel method, where it was like, he would basically say, "Hey, Jack, Doc Ock robs the bank while Spider-Man's trying to cash a check for Aunt May. Go with it." And then Jack would draw all the pictures, and Stan's like, "Okay, here's what they're saying," and he would put the dialogue in later. It was an incredibly efficient way of getting a story done, and collaboratively, rather than having to take the time to say panel 1, panel 2, page 1, page 2. This happens, that happens. Give it generally to the artist, and then go in and write the story on top of the pictures.
Yeah, and I think that it's certainly caused a lot of consternation amongst those audiences that I mentioned earlier. Because they want to elevate Steve and Jack versus Stan, and I just don't buy into it at all. It was collaborative, the way songwriting is collaborative, the way that films are made collaboratively. I mean, I've written documentary scripts, and I've also narrated documentary scripts, and in those processes, you can completely circumvent what the person has written on the page, and it can be better than what was written on the page. And the interesting thing that I really kind of ramped up in the new books is that Stan Lee became the voice of Marvel. And so what people put down as Stan just dialoguing, I think is immensely important, because that patter. So if you went to YouTube right now, if anybody watching clicks over to another YouTube,
don't do that right now.
After we're done talking, just call up any Tom Holland dialogue, any Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr. dialogue. That voice is consistent and based on what Stan Lee created. And that voice, that kind of sarcastic, self-doubt, heroic, but somewhat modest, that is permeated across all culture now. I mean, across television shows, across film. When you watch the latest Thor movie and Thor's goofiness, it replicates the goofiness. It's other writers trying to replicate Stan's voice. So imagine this one person who's had a bigger impact on pop culture when his voice, his writing style, has become a singular voice across all of American culture and global culture. I mean, it's almost unbelievable.
Yeah, and you talk like a collaborative process. It's like an Elton John song. Elton John was one hell of a piano player, gifted, talented, prodigious. But he didn't write those songs. Those were not his lyrics. His partner wrote all those lyrics that you know as Elton John songs. Like, he created the whole thing.
Yep.
So it's the
Bernie
same with
Taupin.
Stan and Jack. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's the same with Stan and Jack, Stan and Steve. It was a melding of minds together, and I'm certain in
And
some
an entire company of other people, colorists,
yeah,
inkers, production staff, the people that worked, even Martin Goodman, who had a very important say in cover design and what he wanted covers to look like and say. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. The collaborative process is so important to so much of, I think of, I'm looking right now at my vinyl of the Doors' greatest hits. It's got the great picture of Morrison as the young lion on the back side, but Morrison wrote some of the lyrics. He didn't write all the lyrics. Robbie Krieger wrote Light My Fire, but Ray Manzarek comes in with the organ, and that's what makes you think Doors. And that's what makes the Doors arguably the most important American rock band of all time. It's that collaboration. And for some reason, some people don't want to give that same kind of collaborative spirit to Jack and Stan and Steve because they had fallouts once the money became really enormous and the fame based on these things became so astronomical.
Yeah, and a lot of people, some of that got started with people that Stan worked with that came away feeling embittered about what they had done. You have Jack created Funky Flashman for DC Comics,
Yep.
Fourth World, which was supposed to be a parody of Stan, because Stan was beyond being a creative writer, he was the perfect pitch man. He became, like you said, the face of Marvel. All those cartoons in the 90s began with face front, true believers, the Incredible Hulk has this, and again, putting him in the movies and such. I was hoping beyond hope that that the Avengers Endgame was going to be solved by Stan being revealed, because he'd been revealed as a Watcher level person, and that hey, that Stan we saw in all the movies is the same Stan. He's the a Watcher level infiltrating the world and watching things. I wanted so much for him to come in as the one above all and just fix the universe, and it would be Stan Lee creates the Marvel Cinematic Universe, complete with mutants and cosmic rays, and just introduce everything with a reboot of the whole thing. Didn't go that
would have
way.
been very cool. That would have been awesome.
But we didn't get that, and we lost him. And as you mentioned, since the publication in 2017, a lot of other things happened to Stan. His life went downhill. There were a lot of stories, regarding elder abuse. How do you put that into? Well, obviously, you did put it into the biography, I'm going to assume, on this. But to put it into a YA biography, how do you keep an upbeat ending for a life that went through those last few years like that?
What I did for the YA book is that I didn't end it at the end of Stan's life. So with the YA book, I extended it to the outcomes. So what did the life mean? Because I didn't want to end on the final note of the elder abuse and the sadness. But yeah, the elder abuse is just a sad case in what can happen to a person, even a person that wealthy. And so, what you hope that readers take away from this, is that we should be more respectful of elderly people in the United States. I mean, that's just bottom line. Not everybody is, and it's sad. But then second, that there needs to be safeguards for people so that other people can't take advantage of them to that level. So for the young adult, I went into the outcomes, into the voice section, and so I kind of flipped in the adult version. I started the book with, look how important and essential Stan Lee is to a current American society. And in the young adult book, I flipped that to the back chapter so that students could see, because, and this might be my own bias, but critical thinking is one of those terms where you say critical thinking to somebody, you think they kind of get what you're talking about. But what I found as an educator is they don't understand it at all. And so it's very difficult actually to teach critical thinking. Certainly in today's world where students don't get the context to understand different things that are happening, coming at a situation. So I wanted them to end with the idea that this person's life, who was so interesting and important as creative icon, still is with us and exists into the future, because I wanted them to understand that context. So I just kind of manipulated the front and the back on the two different books to change the emphasis.
Okay. Robert Roberts in the chat is taking the perspective that Stan, Marvel, and DC made absolute chumps out of writers and artists. No other creative or publishing industry dominated authors like comics. There is, from the corporate's perspective, there's definitely truth to that. I mean, I don't think artists have had a raise in 30 years for their page rates. I'm throwing a number out there. I've heard these decades numbers out there. And of course, we know all about the whole thank you, Marv Wolfman, for creating Bullseye, but he's ours, not yours. And there's been a lot of that whole work for hire. Obviously, the biggest of all is the whole Siegel and Schuster family fight for the trademark rights on Superman and their monies for that. And you see people saying, well, that's why we got a new Superman now, because, hey, different origin, different character, nothing at all like the first one, don't have to pay anything. He belongs to the company. I do recall, this is going way, way back to the 80s, when I wrote a dinosaur to the comic shop. I want to say it was Eclipse Comics, ran these back page, full back page covers about, happy birthday, Marvel. What about Jack? And it was just this full page picture of Jack Kirby, because that was when the whole argument was going on about Jack Kirby getting his artwork back from the company. That wasn't but that wasn't a thing against Stan Lee. That was a thing against Marvel, the corporate, and what contracts meant and what was the agreements that they had. So they were keeping his artwork, and Jack was trying to get it back.
There are a lot of people out in the world, believe me. I can tell you this from writing these books over the last 5 years, that think Stan Lee was somehow the owner of Marvel Comics. And
he was not.
He wasn't. And Stan did manipulate the system to his benefit at times. And some people would say that he did quite frequently because he got extra page rate as writer. And, so it's when you're talking about creativity and creative people, the system is built to punish, maybe too strong a word, but the system is created to take the money of those who aren't at the very top of the mountain. And I think, you've written books. I mean, people assume about me that I'm living on Easy Street or something. And your per word is like less than a penny when you spent years writing a book and then what you make of it. I have friends who are touring musicians that are playing all over the globe that are pretty popular. They're living solidly middle-class lives. And so I think the notion that Marvel was any worse than any other part of the creative endeavor, it's hard to say. My wife, Suzette, her great uncle led a jazz orchestra in the 40s. And they were pretty small town, but they were in New York City. They had 2 hits. They had one really big hit, another kind of semi-hit, big band, kind of swing kind of thing. And we found, doing research on him, that he also went in and recorded as pseudonyms, and they would put them out on albums. Like, they just print them under whatever name, and he made like pennies on the dollar. And so I think if you look at the system itself, it's a very despicable. Being a creative is a tough business. So
Yeah.
I don't know how much I'm into saying that comics were worse, because it's bad all around. It always has been. If you're Stephen King, yeah, maybe you're getting the kudos you deserve and the money that you deserve, or you're Tom Clancy. But there's one Tom Clancy. Since the 80s, there's not been another.
When the people I worked with saw that I had a book published and then learned it was my second book, they were like, why are you still here? My response was always, well, they pay Stephen King first, and then the rest of it gets divvied up among all the other authors.
Exactly.
But I had something on my head before I was going to say that, and I kept my mind on that, and I forgot all about it. But yeah, Robert Roberts talking about like comparing it to music. If Sony owned the rights to all the music and paid rappers $35,000 a year, obviously they don't, because they're getting paid a royalty commission and all that other good stuff.
Yeah. And look, Spotify has been great for music listeners, but my friends who have major record deals, they're not making any money off Spotify, and they're getting if you have 800,000 monthly listeners, you're not making any real money off Spotify. I mean, so you can make more touring, third-rate venues around the Midwest than you can from Spotify. So, the economics of the creative world are tough. Stan Lee could be equated to one of those people who made it. And like you said earlier, he's an overnight sensation at 40 plus. He recreates himself many, many times. I mean, long before Madonna was doing it, Stan Lee was recreating himself. He worked hard. He's from the Depression generation, so he never turned down work because he never thought there'd be another job offer after the one that he was in. And that's a trait of many people of that generation: Bob Dylan, John Updike, Norman Mailer, so many actors and actresses. So it's a very interesting perspective of how creative people make it and how they live in the contemporary world.
Yeah. And, when you think about the people who didn't make it in comics because they were working for the company, it sort of leads into this renaissance that we're experiencing today with comics, with the people who are doing crowdfunding, people doing indie publishing. The alignment of both crowdfunding online and print on demand has made it to where if you've got talent and you can create, you don't have to go through trying to get through the turnstiles of DC or Marvel or any other publisher. You can do it yourself and take it directly to the public. Scott McCloud even has a whole book that'll take you page by page on how to do it.
One of my favorites. And so imagine this. J.M. DeMatteis is one of the legends of comic books. I mean, in my mind, one of the very greats. I grew up reading his stuff, and he agreed and gave me a very nice endorsement for the first book. And so imagine opening your email and J.M. DeMatteis writes something nice about what you've done. I teared up. I mean, he and I don't know him personally. I don't know Steve Englehart, but I grew up in the 70s reading Steve Englehart, and he wrote the most beautiful blurb for the first Stan Lee book. And I mean, I was like in tears. And I just, J.M. DeMatteis had just launched on Kickstarter a campaign. I think he calls it the DeMatteverse. It's his version of the multiverse. And I mean, he's a legend. Like, everybody who ever picked up a comic book and enjoyed it should participate in this Kickstarter, because he is legendary and so important. And I agree with you. I have a friend of mine, Brian Hawkins, posted on Twitter the other day. He's a comic book creator and a writer and editor. And he said that in his life, he's now done close to 500. He's backed 500 people on Kickstarter. And I'm thinking that's the kind of community you want to be involved with. I mean, if Stan were younger, this is what if he were still alive and younger, this is exactly what he would have done. He would have raised so much money.
Yes, he would have. And he was, he was always looking for new opportunities. I mentioned the Stripperella TV show. He was doing these direct to DVD animation pilots for like Mosaic, and he did another one. They weren't awful, but you could tell he was like trying everything. DVDs were a new-ish medium at the time. Direct to home thing was. He'd be doing streaming services today if he had the opportunity. Take advantage of every new medium.
So many people would, I've read so much, so here's the downside when you study Stan Lee. When you read everybody's garbage and like they clearly don't know what they're talking about, you're a jerk if you go online or whatever and tell them that. Like, I'm not that kind of person. I don't want to put that kind of lack of empathy into the world. Like I am a compassionate, empathetic person. That's the vibe I want to put into the world. But you see just the garbage piled on top of Stan Lee. And at some points, I mean, I'll read somebody's post who supposedly knows something. And it's like everything you've just said is biased opinion and factually incorrect. And I just shake my head. And so I think like it's completely unfair. If you look at the history of creativity, how many people were still taking their shot in their 80s and 90s, even their mid to late 70s. And Stan Lee is still trying. And it's like, if you created the characters that Stan created in the Marvel universe, Spider-Man alone, one line, the one line on this t-shirt, with great power comes great responsibility. That one line, how many writers have one line that you just know, that everybody knows? Millions, hundreds of millions of people. Spider-Man will live forever. This is a character that will just keep being reinvented. There's going to be another Tom Holland. There's going to be more iterations. It's going to change. But who has a character that lives on for 100 years? I'm a huge John Updike fan. I wrote a book about John Updike. He's my favorite, one of my favorite writers. Nobody reads John Updike anymore. Nobody reads Norman Mailer anymore. But they'll never stop reading Stan Lee. Spider-Man will exist forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's I won't say it's still new in geological terms, I guess. It's a new mythology. It's like, Stan Lee is the new Plato or the new Homer, telling stories of Hercules. And hey, there's this, really strong guy. He's the sons of gods, and he can change the course of mighty rivers and clean out stables. Stan Lee has done that, and the Spider-Man is one of those characters that will definitely live on in a new pantheon. I would love to be around in 100 years to see how these characters are being treated then, or if they're being remembered. I expect that they will be for a long time.
And so, and as when you write books, you think like, how long is this book? Like, you think the book's going to outlast your body, your physical body. If you're lucky, it's gonna outlast you. And for many of us, that's the reason we write. Like you want to have something that outlives you, that puts your stake in the ground. But so many people, I mean, when I talk to young people today, people in their 20s and 30s, if I said, so tell me tell me about the Scarlet Letter. Like, they don't know. Like it's, it's so you would, but 50 years ago, you would have thought, well, Nathaniel Hawthorne's always going to be read. And it's just not the case anymore as things change and ideas change. But Spider-Man keeps right on adapting. And granted, Spider-Man's only 50 some years old, 60 years old. So it could definitely change, I guess. But I don't think so. And so what Steve and Stan did, deserves our our kudos and our good tiding and not the bickering over, who got what royalties.
Exactly. All right, folks in the chat, Charles Reeves out here. What up? What up? We have been interviewing Bob Batchelor.
Hey, Charles. What up, Charles?
Is the newest iteration of the Stan Lee biography, which, by the way, the link for is below this video. It's the
Awesome.
Amazon link because you can get it on Amazon, and also because we're an Amazon affiliate. So when you go to Amazon through our link, we get a little something.
Nice.
About 2 cents, 3 cents. It's it makes me feel, it makes this a tax write-off is what it does.
Yeah.
So
the thing is, if I could tell viewers one thing, if you dig a book, go to Amazon and review it, give it some stars, write a sentence or two, 10 words, and you will be doing your favorite writer the biggest favor you could possibly do them, because that matters. 10 words and some stars, and you can change a writer's life in a really interesting way, particularly if you want to see more from them. So that's my little call out to people who want to help, in any facet with Amazon. If you favorite musician, favorite writer, whatever it is, take that 5 seconds, write the 2 sentences and give some stars.
And for those who live by internet algorithms like the YouTube ones, the Amazon algorithm is, if you get 50 reviews, not stars, not like just a star and done, 50 written reviews, that's when the book starts to show up in the, if you liked this book, you may also like these book recommendations. That's what gets that book pushed out there. So, definitely write those reviews. Robert Roberts is right. Who will be remembered? Stan Lee, who thought he was writing transitory monthly pamphlets, or L. Ron Hubbard, whose readers are making titanium tablets in underground bunkers? My money's on Stan. I think that the numbers are with him.
That's interesting. Stan didn't start a religion or is not the deity in some kind of religion. So that's interesting. I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about L. Ron Hubbard, but L. Ron Hubbard did not doesn't have box office receipts in the about $15 to $18 billion globally at this point. So let's go with Stan on that one.
All right. As we head out, folks, reminder that the mic stand has just started over on Mike Walter's YouTube channel. There is the link in the chat for all your niche news in comics, manga, anime, and professional wrestling. I still don't know why they go together, but they just do.
The horsemen.
The 4 horsemen of the Comicopolis.
Exactly. I'm giving away my generation, my Gen X credo there. I grew up in Western PA, and I absolutely grew up on professional wrestling. I love Ric Flair so much, and I saw seeing Goldberg for the first time in I think what was it, 90s or something. But yeah. So that sounds like a great show. So people should check that out. Is all cool pop culture things plus and including wrestling. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. Bob, thank you so much for coming on tonight and talking about the Stan Lee biography. I've had this brilliant mindstorm now that may or may not happen, that I would love to have you back on as a co-starring guest with Glenn Fleming, if I could get him. And the reason I say that, Glenn Fleming just published a biography of Jack Kirby after, he had spent some time in Jack Kirby's house, meeting him and going through art and such, and did a crowdfunded biography on that, including the DVD of the home films that were taken there and interviews with Jack. So it would be an interesting contrast and compare to get some of those stories lined up to see what he learned. But it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and thank you for reaching out to me. Please do so again in the future with every other project you have.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the time and the space you've given me to talk. I would add that I am as pro Jack Kirby as anybody on the planet. I love Jack Kirby. I just see them as equal collaborators, and that's so when people, if you see somebody on the web on the interwebs slamming Bob Batchelor for being anti Jack Kirby, you know that they have not read my books, because it's clear that I am an equal fan. And so I would love that. And if I can just throw a quick plug in, one thing that I have coming out. So if you ask yourself, what did Bob Batchelor do during lockdown, is that I actually had time to write. And on November 8th, I have another book publishing. It's called Roadhouse Blues, Morrison, the Doors, and the Death Days of the 60s. And the early buzz on this book has been pretty fantastic. It looks at the 60s. It looks at Morrison. It looks at the real Jim Morrison, not the clown superhero doll that was just a party animal. And I'm very proud of the book. I think it's gonna be a big hit. And it's kind of Gen X take on the baby boomer generation. And so I'm pretty psyched about it. It's going to be out less than a month, but so if you're interested in history and classic rock, then this is one for you.
Very, very much. Yeah, I used to in college in 86 through 89, because I accelerated my course of work. One of my roommates was a Doors fan in our apartment, and I remember I'd come home and nobody else was there, and I just put the album on, and I left all the lights off, and I had my 80s black sunglasses on, and I just kind of sat back like the Memorex guy in the chair, and it was just playing the Doors. One of my other roommates came home, and it was like he just stopped at the door, closed it quietly, sat down. We had a little platform that came in on the door, and then 2 steps. He just sat down on the 2 steps and waited, because it was like a religious ceremony that he was interrupting accidentally, and he just let the album play out. But
I love that you and I are very close in age, and I dig talking to Gen Xers about like that era, because it was so much fun and so different than what people are going through today. And so that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. That's a very cool image.
Spoiler alert on the book: is Mojo still out there, or is he really gone?
No, he's gone. Sadly,
he's gone. Okay. I kept waiting for Mr. Mojo. If you don't know who Mr. Mojo Risen is, just rearrange the letters and you'll figure it all out, folks. Secret.
Yeah, type that into YouTube once we're done here, and spend the next 6 or 8 or 10 weeks or days or years listening to Doors music.
Yes, it'll be a rabbit hole you will not come out of willingly. All right,
exactly.
Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for being here tonight. We don't have a show
thank you.
Without you, as I always say. We're just a podcast falling in the woods otherwise, making no noise whatsoever. And as always, while you were here, we hope you had a blast. Good night.